So this is my 3D printed 2-inch eyepiece desiccant holder. It has a center shaft that goes through, and there's a lot of little holes in that pillar there. So you fill the exterior with desiccant. You put a O-ring around the outside here, and once you knock this brim off, you can set it down into your telescope, basically right where an eyepiece would go. And there's a lid that screws on the top, and it will draw moisture out of your body of the telescope into the desiccant. Now, my thread library has an error in it, and instead of fixing it digitally, I'm going to fix it mechanically. Alright, so to clean up that little piece of plastic that shouldn't be there, I just reach in with a pair of pointy pliers and kind of grab it and yank it back and forth and pull it out. It's kind of rough in there, so you can run your pointy thing back and forth a few times, but generally when you screw the threads in, it'll be fine. It'll knock it down. Alright, so in addition to taking off that little bit there, you might rub the tip of your pliers back and forth. And then the first time you put this together and screw it on, I recommend putting positive force in to hold the layer lines together. As you twist this thing in, it's going to scrape and click a little bit. And then after you get that the first time, it screws in pretty smoothly here. Now this is about 3% bigger than the thread, so it's a little bit loosey-goosey there. But you might notice we have this ring for the 2-inch outside diameter O-ring, so that seals it into the eyepiece of the telescope, but the lid is designed so that exact same size O-ring fits right up there in the top and seals against this top face here. And so with that O-ring in place, basically it will seal down and hold that thing quite tightly. Now, you will probably want to spray paint or somehow coat the inside here and the inside here above that little ring with something that is resistant to air moving in and out, because you want the air to be coming through these holes and maybe just sneaking around in the layer lines there. So basically it's trying to draw the moisture out of the telescope, not out of the air up here. Right, so this has a center pillar which has a hole all the way up through it and has holes cut into it like this. So we're losing a little bit of volume to desiccant beads in there, but the idea is that it'll promote airflow up into the center point, so that all the beads up at the top will have a chance to get some moisture absorbed, as well as the beads that are pressed up against these holes at the bottom. And it has that same slot for the O-ring there. Now this FDM printing isn't really airtight, so what I'm going to do is seal everything above that O-ring. So basically I'm going to kind of paint on a UV curing resin in this area here, and I'm going to put UV curing resin in here as well. I'm actually going to just kind of put it in around or inside the O-ring. So I'm not going to cover the O-ring, but I'm going to use the O-ring to kind of hold the resin in a circle here, and it will lock that O-ring in place. And the idea is I'll have a sealed top surface and then a sealed cylindrical surface in here, so the only way air can get in and out is through the holes and this little tube, and anything that leaks in the sides here is fine too. Now, if I didn't already have UV curing resin, I'd probably just hit this with several coats of a clear coat spray paint. But since I have UV curing resin, I'm going to use this. The benefits are that it goes in and can cure a lot faster. So basically, once it's exposed to sun, 10-15 minutes later, it's completely cured. And I can do a single layer because it's pretty thick. And it will basically be done and cured and ready to go just as soon as I expose it to UV light for a couple of minutes. And I'm using the lid here just to hold this while I'm using my disposable brush Q-tip to coat the interior here. So that's completely coated, and it's thick enough it doesn't really drip too badly. It will flow eventually, but not too badly. And then I'm just going to put more in here. I definitely don't want to cover the O-ring, but I want to get up to the O-ring all the way around. So I kind of want to touch the bottom of the O-ring without actually covering the rubbery part at the top. Obviously a Q-tip isn't the best thing here, but I'm not too worried about getting a little bit of cotton fiber stuck in this. Alright, now that I'm ready to open the garage door to let the light in. So out in the sun I can see the shiny area goes all the way down there until where this O-ring is. This guy here, you can kind of see the reflective shiny area inside of the O-ring. That has the added benefit of sticking that O-ring in place. Not that it was really falling out on its own, but it's definitely not coming out now. You just have to make sure you don't get on top of the O-ring, otherwise it won't be able to compress. So the nice thing about this UV cure resin is you take it outside and expose it to the sun, and it basically is super tacky and solidified just within a couple of seconds. It's not fully cured, but it won't move around after you expose it to the sun. And so after I've exposed all the sides to the sun, I can just leave it out in the sunlight. And there's lots of UV light coming off the sun, so it cures pretty quickly. And so I can use this just, a couple minutes after putting that resin on. Alright, so getting the fit of this O-ring perfect really helps things. The 3D model is set to 46 millimeters, and then I've just kind of painted on some resin. And you could use epoxy resin. I use UV curing resin. That's mostly to do an airtight covering, but also to bulk it up a little bit and make it a little more rounded and strengthen up that gap. But the idea here is not very thick at all, because when you put this O-ring on, you want it to be able to rotate around that gap still. So it shouldn't be tight enough that you can't easily rotate it. On the other hand, you don't want it to wiggle and have big gaps. So let me show you when you put it into a 2-inch tube what it should look like. Alright, so when you slide this in, it should sit on the top of the tube there. And to get it in, I just rotate and push down just gently. And that makes a solid connection. So this guy is not rotating, it's not going up and down much. It's basically an airtight connection with that O-ring. Now to get it out, I can just rotate while pulling up and it pops out easily. So you want it to be, just 2 fingers. You can push down, it kind of sinks down in there, and then it has a nice airtight seal. And then you can just rotate a little and pull it up and it pops up. So that's the amount of kind of air seal you want. And you don't want it to be too hard to push in. You don't want it to pop out without having an airtight seal. Then you just fill it with desiccant beads, put the lid on, seal it down there. Hardest part is getting the desiccant beads in there without spilling too many. They kind of want to bounce off of that center point there if you go straight, so I've found going at an angle helps. And it doesn't necessarily hurt to cover the center point, but you want to make sure that this lid, that ring around there, can seal.
That first layer is kind of important for this print.